Hi, this is Scott Garibay, and today we're going to talk about Dungeons & Dragons 5th Edition, and I'm going to talk about content that Ben from Questing Beast did, and I'm going to convert it to I'm going to put it on a bumper sticker. I'm going to condense it, and I'm going to convert it to 5e content. But I want to be super clear: everything I'm talking about today, this is super great content that Questing Beast created on his own channel. And I'll link to the video below, but what he said was so valuable. I think one, I like things to be condensed, right? So I condensed this so I can remember it, and I'm hoping that my condensing can help you remember it. And then two, questing from Ben from Questing Beast is a D&D not community member, in my humble opinion, and I think a lot of D&D not people watch his channel. But what he puts out, and especially this video, is so good and so important that Dungeons & Dragons, and it's completely applicable to Dungeons & Dragons 5th Edition Dungeon Masters, and really 5th Edition Dungeon Masters should be doing what Ben from Questing Beast does. So first, let's talk a little bit about Ben from Questing Beast. I can't rave about this guy enough. I think he's definitely top 3 Dungeons & Dragons commentator in the world, one of the top 3. And the reason why is, one, he has this very level, calm demeanor, and like on the D&D not community and on the D&D now community, we have a bunch of intense, adamant people insisting they're right. I'm one of them, right? And he's just really level and calm, right? Now, I would love to say, oh, if I could only be like Ben, but I can't be like Ben. And the reason why is Ben doesn't have goals, right? Like, he doesn't have goals for the industry or the hobby or for Dungeons and Dragons, right? He's like, you do you, I'll do me, and everything's cool, right? And I just can't. I love his spirit, and I love his calmness and his zen nature, but I can't do it. And the reason why is I want things, right? Like, so I want the decades of experience and wisdom that comes with D&D not and D&D then players to mix with the passion and the excitement and the money and the momentum of D&D now, right? I want those things merged, right? And I want to take resources from D&D not, and I want to put them on D&D now. And the reason why is there's a clock. The D&D notters and D&D theners are literally dying. They have a bunch of experience in their heads and in their hearts and in their souls, and I want to squeeze it like juice and splash it all over the D&D now people who need to learn 100 lessons that the D&D then and D&D not have, but in my opinion are selfishly keeping within their own little hovel, right? Like, and it's just so that's why I just have so much respect for Ben, but I can never be like Ben because I got goals, right? I got goals for the Dungeons and Dragons industry, for the tabletop role-playing game industry, and what I need to accomplish is on a clock, right? There just ain't time for the peaceful Ben nature, right? But the reality is, Ben's content haunts me because it's so much better than mine, and it's darn near perfect, right? So let's get to what he said. So what he did a video on what are the duties of a dungeon master. All right, so here we go. Now, first of all, it's ironic he would say dungeon master because, like, the vast majority of his games are D&D not games and don't even use that term, right? But that's the only reason why I consider him a Dungeons & Dragons commentator. He's really talking about Dungeons & Dragons in a lot of cases, right? He's coming, nobody escapes its orbit, including Ben, all right, so what did he say? So he gave the 5 duties of a dungeon master in one video, and I'm going to condense it. So it condenses to 5 words: prepare host world, hack track. Prepare host world, hack track. Prepare host world, hack track. Prepare. He said, a dungeon master prepares for the session. Amen, brother. Right? Like, and this is really important that he said this, because there's a lot of nonsense floating around right now about minimal prep, right? And I'm convinced minimal prep is an absolute myth. It comes from 2 sources. It comes from liars, people who just lie. They're like, oh, I run. It's from liars, misunderstanders, and misconstruers, right? So liars, I think there's some just people who are like, oh, I never prep for my games and everything works out great, right? And what they're not telling you is it doesn't always work out great. Sometimes it's really or they're not telling you the frustration that they are either oblivious. Well, I think they're not even, for the liars, they're not oblivious. They know it's not great for everybody at the table, but they don't care, right? And they're like, oh, I can run a game with minimal prep, right? And I'm like, it would be a lot better if you just prepared for your game, right? The other ones are people who are oblivious, right? Like, so people who don't understand. They do minimal prep, and I'm convinced this social interaction pillar issue, I think in the Dungeons and Dragons community, we got a lot of people who are really bad at social interaction. Myself, right? I'm good as I'm good at serving in my church. I'm good at being a husband, and I'm good at being a father. But there were some, bumps in the road getting there. I'm a terrible friend. I'm just like, I have social interaction problems, and there are a lot of people who in the D&D community I think have serious social interaction problems. So one of them is there are these minimal preppers who literally aren't reading the signals on their players, and their players are just putting up with them because they can't find a decent DM, right? So minimal prep, so you have people who are just oblivious to the bad game they're running on minimal prep, right? And then the last ones are the misconstruers, right? These are people who are like, oh yeah, I prep for 20 minutes for my game. Well, the reason you're prepping for 20 minutes from your game is you have 300 minis organized, right? And you have 3 module books memorized in your head, right? And you're leaning on decades of games where you did not do minimal prep and might have prepped for a week, right, for a game, right? And so, some people are getting away with minimal prep now because they have decades of experience and they've dumped a ton of time into building structures, and they're not counting that time, right? Like, they're not minimal prepping. They've been prepping for years, and they're just like, this week they're not prepping because they spent hours or weeks or months in the last few years, right? So minimal prep sucks. Don't fool yourself, right? Prep for your games, right? And honestly, I think it's a 50 to 100% time rate. So if you have a 4-hour game, you should be prepping 2 hours in a week. Okay, so, and Ben from Questing, we said this flat out. Prepare for your session. He said it's the number one duty, right? Like, okay, host. The Dungeon Master hosts the game, right? Now, there are exceptions for this, but generally, I totally agree with him. The Dungeon Master hosts the game, right? I'm going to talk about something I think is really interesting, right? I don't need to tell you about hosting and what you got to do to host, right? But get this. I host my game, right? You know why I host my game? I own a house, right? And here's a tip for you. You gonna Dungeon Master? You better have your S together, right? Like, you better have your stuff together, right? And honestly, if you're gonna host, you need to have a space where you can bring people in, right? And in order to have a space in today's world where you can bring people in, you got to be organized. You got to have accomplished some things, right? In order for me to be a homeowner, I had to go through a tough journey. It wasn't easy, right? Like, and it's not easy being a homeowner and maintaining it, right? Like, but I got my stuff together, right? Like, and so this host part is a big deal. Like, you need your life on rails. Like, you need to really have your stuff together to really be a Dungeon Master. You're never going to see that printed by Wizards of the Coast and going, hey, maybe, maybe stop doing 420 and, like, get your life together, right? Like, Dungeon Mastering, the hosting thing, nested within it is saying you need to be a significant human being, right? You got to have your stuff together. That's a big one, right? Okay. World. You play the world, right? And you play the world. So you play all the non-player characters. You control the weather. You control the deities, right? And he brought out this great point. It needs to be impartial. It needs to be impartial. You need to be an impartial judge. You need to treat every player the same, right? Also, brilliant. He talked about Justin Alexander, right? He quoted Justin Alexander. The players versus the world, not the players versus you. Brilliant, right? Like, you play the world, okay? Now, next is hack. You hack the rules. Page 4 of the Dungeon Master in the Player's Handbook, in the 5th edition Player's Handbook, 5th edition Dungeon Master Guide says, the rules are not in charge. You are in charge, right? So you are expected to change the rules. Now, I have an amendment to this, right? in that when you hack the rules, you're not actually homebrewing at all. You're not really changing the rules. It is expected that you will customize in Dungeons & Dragons, and your customization is baked into the default, right? So you are expected to adjust to your players so that you're building this incredibly bespoke, important, beautiful, specific, very tailored experience for your 4 players, right? So you have to hack the rules, okay? And then last, this is incredible, right? It seems simple. It's not. It's a deep, deep statement. Track. You track time. You track time, okay? And just so you're aware, I'm really excited. Blades in the Dark is getting a lot of experience. It's getting a lot of attention right now. People are like, oh my gosh, look at Blades in the Dark. And I'm like, dude, this game's 5 years old. Why are people discovering it now? But it has these clocks, right? And it's just a really quick way to track achievements. But in Dungeons & Dragons, it's very important that you understand that you are building sequencing, right? You sequence events that are happening, and you're placing non-player characters in certain areas. You're placing weather events in certain areas. You're placing temples in certain areas. You're placing artifacts in certain areas, right? And you need to know, when are these events happening? You track time. True genius narratives, beautiful, highly crafted, gorgeous stories happen from sequencing being accomplished perfectly. Sequencing is one of the most important things in the world. You know how I know this? Well, one of the things is, from my professional world, I deal with a lot of project managers, right? And what they do nowadays, more and more, the only thing they're doing is they're sequencing. They're saying, we have 15 tasks. This task has to happen here. This task has to happen here. Oh, this task can't happen here. What can we use that time for? We need to sequence it, right? And a good dungeon master is perfectly sequencing clear characters, locations, entities, artifacts, and relationships, right? And they're perfectly putting these into slotted sequences. And sometimes they need to shift that sequencing in real time, right? And it's incredibly difficult to get done right over story arc after story arc after story arc, campaign after campaign after campaign. And so we work at it and we master it, and we pay attention to every story we encounter, right? We encounter stories and we absorb them, right? So this is all Ben from Crafting Beasts content, condensed, okay? Prepare, host world, hack track. That's his concept in 5 words. Prepare, host world, hack track. Remember it, do it, right? If you are Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition and you want to get better, do what Ben says, because this is good and right, and this is how it's done, right? And I'm just, and I have to say, I'm like jealous of Ben from Questing Beasts, because he looked at the Dungeon Master slot and turned it into, into 5 rules. And I'll tell you right now, if you do these things, you will get better, right? And if you pay attention to the importance he's putting on each one of these, it will definitely help you to craft a great game. Ben from Questing Beast, link to his videos below. You could watch any of his videos and they're 10 times better than mine. This guy he's got it on rails. He's just doing everything perfectly and really making an amazing, wonderful content. And he's doing it on the D&D not side. I don't like that. I don't like it when the D&D knots are better than my content. But Ben from Questing Beast achieves it. All that's my opinion. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. Do you think he missed anything? Do you think any one of these is more important than others? I'd love to hear your thoughts. Let me know in the comments below. Please consider liking and subscribing, and have a wonderful millennium.